Week 7 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few defense DST units. Have a look to head off the wire this week. The first one, the Chicago Bears. I thought the Bears, I know they gave up 24 points on Monday night in week 6 to the Commanders, but their defense went out there and they were flying around and making plays and made some big key turnovers in that one to come back and win the ball game in the second half. So the last few games for the Bears, DST week 3 versus the Cowboys, 14 points allowed, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery. Week 4 at the Raiders, 24 points allowed, 3 interceptions, a fumble recovery, a block kick. In week 6 at the Commanders, 24 points allowed. In that game, 3 sacks, an interception, 2 fumble recoveries. So they get into the quarterback, led by Sweat on the pass rush, and they're making plays in the secondary and causing havoc. So this week with a good matchup versus Saints, that's a mediocre offense and does turn the football over, and the line isn't that good. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I think Chicago is a good ad for fantasy owners, and they're out there right now 93% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Cleveland Browns. So this Brown team, I know last week they didn't do anything. I thought they would have an okay ball game, at least versus Aaron Rodgers and this middle-of-the-pack type of offense to the Pittsburgh Steelers. But obviously that wasn't the case, where they didn't score any fantasy points or get any stats on the board. So the last few weeks for Cleveland, week 3 versus Green Bay, 10 points allowed, 5 sacks, an interception, a block kick. Week 4 at Detroit, obviously that's a very tough matchup. They did nothing, 34 points allowed, interception. Week 5 versus Minnesota, 21 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. And then at Pittsburgh, 23 points allowed. But this week a matchup versus the Dolphins, give up the 16th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. I think Myles Garrett, he's going to get a few sacks in this ball game. And also Miami, their offensive line is all banged up and hasn't done much. And Tua has been a turnover machine for the majority of the season. So with all those factors, and this Brown team better at home than they are on the road, and Miami a better team at home than they are on the road. So with Miami traveling to Cleveland, I think this defense could go out there, buckle down, and make some things happen, and they're available right now in tons of leagues in 62%. The next DST is the New York Jets. So the New York Jets, in that London game, they held their own versus that Bronco offense, and it's been a weird offense this season of the Denver Broncos. So this week, it's a decent matchup versus the Panthers, 7th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season, even though the last couple weeks, Carolina's gone out there, and they're putting points on the board, led by Rico Dotto, running like a man possessed right now for this Carolina team. So the last few weeks for the Jets DST, week 4 Miami, 27 points allowed. Week 5 versus the Cowboys, 37 points allowed, a sack. And then, like I said, week 6 in London versus Denver, that buckled down, 13 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery, and a safety. So the Panthers, like I said, 7th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. This Jet team, the worst team in the league, 0-6. They've only created 1 turnover as well in 6 games, which isn't a plus. But I think this week versus Bryce Young in Carolina coming in, this Jet defense could maybe hold them in the mid-teens, low 20s, possibly get a couple sacks, and maybe, just maybe, they'll get a couple turnovers, even though highly unlikely. So in deeper leagues, if you need a streaming option, Jets are out there in 90% of fantasy leagues. Next DST is the Miami Dolphins. So Miami, I know their defense is one of the worst units in the league, but they're versing one of the worst offenses in the league going into Cleveland is this Miami DST. So something's got to give in that ball game. In the last few weeks for this DST, week 4 versus the Jets, 21 points allowed, 2 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries. Week 5 at Carolina, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, an INT, a fumble recovery. In week 6 versus the Chargers, couldn't get anything going, 29 points allowed, a sack, a fumble recovery. So Dylan Gabriel, it's his first home start in the dog pound in Cleveland. So far, he's been okay in the first 2 starts of his NFL career as Dylan Gabriel, but the Cleveland Browns do give up the 5th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So I think Miami, even with a depleted secondary coming into the season, obviously training camp, a lot of injuries, and not showing much on the field, I think they could take advantage a little bit of the rookie and Dylan Gabriel, get to him a few times, maybe a couple turnovers. And this offense, we know, don't put a lot of points on the board, where they can hold them as well in those mid-teens, low 20s, and they're available 97% of fantasy leagues. And the final DST is the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, Miami's playing Cleveland, who was on the list, and the Panthers playing the Jets. And something's got to give in these ball games. I don't believe these are going to be 2 shootouts, these games. So Carolina's DST obviously hasn't been good, except week 3 they had a monster game versus Atlanta, 2 interceptions, had the shutout, fumble recovery for a touchdown in that ball game. And then in week 4 New England 42 points allowed a sack. Week 5 versus Miami, 24 points allowed, 3 sacks. And then week 6 versus Dallas, 27 points allowed. But they're at the New York Jets. 8th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. New York last week, they couldn't even get a first down, it seemed like. And they had negative 10 net yards in that ball game. So it was a disaster, no doubt about it. But that was versus Denver. But the Carolina Panthers, I think in this one, they're coming off of 2 nice victories versus Miami and Dallas, even though those were home games for them. And now they go to the New York Jets, where the Jets are real 0-6, and they're an offense that's in disarray a little bit. So Carolina in deeper leagues, if you need an ad, they're available in 99% of fantasy leagues. That's a few defense DST units I look to add for week 7 of the fantasy football season.